This morning, the state's new abortion law could become a big boost for Democrats. Is that why prominent Republicans like former President Trump haven't praised it? The bill's author, State Senator Brian Hughes, explains the one exception in this law that isn't getting much attention. Also, next week, the third special session. There's redistricting and Governor Abbott asking for a do-over, deciding he wants to protect dogs after all. Plus, Texas Republicans again targeting transgender athletes in public schools. Randy Weingarten, the national president of AFT, makes a personal plea on our program. And Republicans think Greg Abbott is vulnerable next year, so why don't Democrats seem to? A preview of this week's episode of our Y'all-itics podcast with veteran Texas Democrat Harold Cook.
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
And good Sunday morning to our viewers all across the state of Texas today. I'm Jason Wheeler, filling in for Jason Whiteley this week. Let's begin this week with the top political headlines across Texas. Governor Greg Abbott wants a do-over on a bill that will protect dogs. Earlier this year, you may remember, Abbott vetoed a bipartisan bill that would have outlawed people from leaving their dogs outside unattended without shelter. Abbott didn't think Texas needed it at the time, but then he caught some backlash, and now he's asking lawmakers to pass that bill again in next week's third special session so he can sign it this time. A Democrat running for Texas Attorney General just outraised every single Republican in the race. Attorney Lee Merritt announced the big fundraising numbers just a few days ago. Merritt collecting $285,000 from donors in the last quarter. That is significantly more than Republicans Ken Paxton, George P. Bush, or Eva Guzman brought in that same period. Speaking of Paxton, the long-running criminal case against him for securities fraud is now going back to Collin County in North Texas. That's where Paxton lives. Prosecutors had previously successfully gotten that moved to Houston. The legal wrangling has been going on for 6 years now. It's still unclear, though, when Attorney General Paxton will actually stand trial for securities fraud. All right, we want to begin today with the state's new abortion law. It's being talked about all across the country, but noticeably absent from that conversation are some prominent Republicans. Former President Trump, for example, said he wasn't yet sure what to think about it. The bill's author is State Senator Brian Hughes. He's a Republican from Mineola in East Texas, and he spoke to Jason Whiteley.
Senator Hughes, thank you for being back on the program. I want to start this interview with a question about the new abortion law that one of my colleagues asked the governor the other day. Why force a sexual assault survivor or an incest victim to carry a pregnancy all the way to term?
It's hard to imagine a more difficult situation than that. We've visited with a number of rape victims. We've heard from adults who say that they were conceived in rape and talk about what that was like. It's hard to enter into that. So it's a horrible situation. We wouldn't want to make it worse by taking a life. We don't punish the little unborn child. We do punish that rapist. You know, rape is a felony in Texas, as it should be. It should be punished harshly. For the mother, though, we want to make clear, the Alternatives to Abortion program is just one example, and you've covered this before. Texas now spends $100 million in state and federal money to help women with difficult situations, difficult choices to make, to help them while they're carrying the child, and if they put the child up for adoption or choose to keep the child.
But how about incest, though? I mean, separate from rape, which is already horrible, but how about incest? Let's say a young teenage girl was sexually assaulted by a relative of hers.
A situation like that is hard for us to even think about. We know those things do happen, and we don't want to do the same thing. We'd have to come alongside and help that young girl, and encourage her, and give her tangible help. We wouldn't punish the little unborn baby for that.
What happens if a mother's life is in peril? That's something that we've always seen the Republicans say that they were opposed to abortion, except in extreme cases, rape, incest, or a mother's life in jeopardy. What happens now if a mother's life is in peril?
I'm glad you asked. There's a clear exception for the mother's life or serious risk to the mother's health. That's crystal clear. That this language has been vetted in court. Physicians know what it means. So yes, sir, there's definitely an exception if the mother's life or serious risk to the mother's health is in jeopardy. There's definitely an exception for that.
Senator, the legal genius of this abortion bill is that the state does not enforce it. It's enforced by individual citizens, and that has helped it escape judicial review at the U.S. Supreme Court. But now there are some democratically controlled states and other parts of the country, which I'm sure you've heard of by now, talking about maybe banning some types of firearms and not having the state enforce it there, but modeling the Texas bill and letting citizens enforce that. How concerned are you that a legal precedent has been set with this argument you guys are making, with this law that now exists?
Well, it's a good discussion to have. As you know, this concept of qui tam, it goes back to the English common law. It exists in federal law where under the False Claims Act, anyone can bring a claim against someone who's defrauding the government, and the person bringing the claim, if they prove it, is financially incentivized to do that. In consumer protection laws in all 50 states. In Texas, we have the Medicaid fraud statute, been on the books for years, and it says any person can bring a claim, and they're incentivized to do that. So this is not a new concept, but you'll recall what happened last year. We had, in fact, our Dallas County District Attorney was one of dozens of district attorneys around the country who publicly stated, we will not enforce pro-life laws. You can pass a heartbeat bill if you want to, but we're not going to enforce it. So when district attorneys representing millions of Texans say, we will not enforce the law, the people of Texas have to respond. And so acting through the legislature, we're empowering private enforcement of this law. So it makes sense. It's not a new concept. It's been in the English common law for a long time, and it fits here.
The abortion law is what Republicans have been trying to do for decades, ever since the Supreme Court ruled on Roe v. Wade. Here's what I'm curious about, though. Why are so many top Republicans so strangely quiet about this, especially former President Donald Trump saying he's not yet sure if he supports it? What's going on?
I think the law taking effect caught some people by surprise. We're accustomed to passing pro-life laws. We pass them somewhat regularly, and they're always blocked by the courts pending the litigation. It wins its way to the Supreme Court, and recently we've been winning. Sometimes we lose. So I think when we passed a law in Texas and it took effect, it kind of shocked everyone. This is not the normal paradigm. So I think that's what we're dealing with. Folks weren't expecting that. They're having to go back and take a look at the law and a little closer at what it actually does.
Senator Hughes, we appreciate the time.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, let's stay with the state legislature for just a moment here. Lawmakers will return to Austin again a week from Monday on September 20th. This is going to be the third special legislative session. Redistricting is the big item on the agenda this time, but there are a few other things that lawmakers are going to be considering. Ross Ramsey has gone through the new list. He is the co-founder and executive editor of the Texas Tribune and is in Austin as always. Good morning to you, Ross. I want to ask you, first of all, we're all watching to see how Texas gets carved up for redistricting. Can they actually get that done in 30 days? And what else of note do lawmakers have to consider?
It's possible to do it in 30 days, and it's one of the two things that they have to do this session. The other is to spend $16 billion in federal COVID relief money, something that's probably a little bit more bipartisan. They've got a couple of things that the Republicans want to do. They want to do this transgender athlete regulation bill that they talked about all year and haven't gotten done. And they want to talk about mask mandates. And then they've got a mess to clean up. The governor vetoed an animal cruelty bill about tethering dogs and would like to straighten that out before they go into an election year and have to talk about cruelty to animals.
One more thing real quick, Ross. The NAACP and some student groups suing the University of Texas now over the school song, The Eyes of Texas, claiming it creates a hostile campus environment for black athletes and students. How does this play out?
Well, they don't like the compromise that the song remains in use, and they're just going to continue the fight. I don't know how it'll come out in the courts, but we can say that it's going to stay in the courts for a while.
Ross Ramsey with the Texas Tribune. Stick around. We'll see you in the Reporters Roundtable. Still to come, Randy Weingarten, the national president of the American Federation of Teachers, makes a personal plea on this program, just as Texas Republicans are again targeting transgender athletes in public schools. Also, Republicans think that Greg Abbott is vulnerable next year, so why don't Democrats seem to? Not a single candidate for governor yet on the left. No Democrat able to take advantage right now of the governor's recent poll drop. You're going to want to hear a preview of this week's podcast with veteran Texas Democrat Harold Cook. Welcome back. We have watched the classroom become one of the biggest battlegrounds in the culture wars. Mask mandates, critical race theory, even which sports teams that transgender athletes should play on are hotly being debated right now. Our next guest has a plea this morning. Randy Weingarten is the national president for AFT, the American Federation of Teachers, and here she is with Jason Whiteley.
Randy, welcome to Texas. Critical race theory,
I'm sure this is an issue you guys have followed all. You know, laws have passed in some states, including here in Texas, but during the debates we heard so much about what might be happening. Now that school has started back, what are you guys seeing in practice? What are your members telling you?
Well, look, school has just started in the last few weeks. And what we have said to our members is that you have a responsibility to teach honest history. That is part and parcel of what a social studies teacher like myself has to do. What are the implications of slavery? How did slavery actually start? And what I was shocked about in terms of the Texas law is that the Texas law says, if I remember correctly, that we're supposed to teach that the founders opposed slavery. The founders didn't oppose slavery. Some of the founders owned slaves. Now, you know, Jefferson, there were so many good things about Jefferson, but he owned slaves. And so ultimately, we have an obligation to teach honestly. And so what we've said to our members is that if you do so, we will defend you. I think what this is it is a political issue. Again, these issues, whether there's mass mandates, whether we teach honest history, it's as if schools and our kids have now become political pawns in the 2022 election. Like, you know, and as opposed to just let us teach and let us do it in a safe manner.
Last issue here too. State lawmakers here in Texas will again consider a bill this month you may have heard about regarding transgender student athletes, and it requires schools to use students' biological sex at birth to determine which teams that student can play on. Republicans say it's just not fair to have a boy who transitioned to a girl play on a team and compete against girls. What do you think about that?
You know, again, I'm a school teacher, but I also was a gay person as a kid, and still am. These cultural issues, these issues that undermine who kids are, what they want to be for themselves, they really are terrible for children. These are cultural issues that adults play with to try to divide people. If you were the parent of someone who is trans, you would know that this kind of bill hurts your kid. Let's stop it. Let's stop making kids pawns in cultural issues. Let's teach them, let's care for them, let's give them a welcoming and safe environment, and not make them pawns in somebody else's political issue.
Randy, thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Let's talk about the calendar now. Labor Day is traditionally when political campaigns really start to ramp up, but that date has come and gone. Republicans clearly think that Greg Abbott is vulnerable next year. He has a couple of GOP challengers already. So why don't Democrats seem eager to get in the race and take him on, especially with his poll numbers sagging now? Here's a preview of our next Yolitics podcast. Jason Whiteley and I speaking with veteran Texas Democrat Harold Cook in an episode that drops Tuesday.
Republicans think Greg Abbott is vulnerable, Harold, because obviously three Republicans or conservatives are running against him. Why haven't we seen a single Democrat get into this race yet?
Well, I think it's probably because Beto O'Rourke is going to freeze the field, if there is a field, until he makes up his mind and announces whether he's going to run or not. He, I think, starts out in the lead in any primary, in the Democratic primary anyway. And I'm kind of scared to death that he's not going to run. And I'm also scared to death that he will run. Everybody on my personal list of possible candidates for governor has really, really strong strengths. And they have some of them have some weaknesses, and others have just got a lot of unknowns.
Here we are. We've got this new poll that just came out
and the Texas Election Project there, and Texas Politics Project, rather, at the University of Texas at Austin, showing Governor Abbott with about the most dismal numbers that we've seen as far as approval and disapproval, and that includes among independents. That really looked ugly for him this time around. You've got school districts across the state that are defying his orders right now. You have sniping from the right of him going into a primary. He's got a lot of vulnerabilities. COVID is still surging here in Texas, but you don't have a candidate on the Democratic side who can make some hay out of that about a year out from elections right now.
No, that is exactly right. I agree with you completely. Every day that goes by where we don't have a candidate or candidates for governor is another missed opportunity. Do I think it's a fatal mistake? No, it's not, but I don't like missing opportunities. And I mean, especially, what if we had had a big favorite for governor who was already announced a week ago when all this abortion stuff came out? They would have already raised $3 million based on that issue alone.
Harold, give me an idea. What is the main concern among Democrats, among Lena Hidalgo, among the Castros, among all these potentially really good Democratic candidates? Is it time, energy, and money, or are they scared of Abbott's war chest? What is the thing that's holding people back?
Well, you know, it's a little bit of everything. It really just depends on the person you're talking about. Some people legitimately like the jobs they're in, and they're not looking to move up. They're doing exactly what they wanted to do. Others, it would not be irrational to be giving serious pause to running up against an opponent with so much money and so much fundraising power. And at times past, it would have been rational for them to pause and think, why am I going to run against a popular incumbent governor? And right now, though, that is not true. He is not very popular at all.
Everybody's been talking about Texas' new abortion law. It took the attention off Afghanistan, and it could become a central rallying point for Democrats in the midterms. We're going to talk about the politics surrounding it next on our roundtable. Okay, it's time now for our Reporters Roundtable. Back with us is Ross Ramsey from the Texas Tribune in Austin, and each week joining us, Bug Kennedy from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram and Bernadine Steptoe, the political producer at WFAA in Dallas. Thanks to all for being here. We've got a lot to talk about here. Ross, let's start off with that abortion law that the whole nation has been talking about all week now. It is being taken up in the courts, the Justice Department saying that it is unconstitutional. Meanwhile, politically, a Washington Post columnist says this is the best thing that could have happened to the Biden-Harris administration because it took eyes off of Afghanistan and could energize Democrats.
It energizes a part of the electorate that wasn't necessarily paying attention. You know, the Republicans in Texas have been playing to Republicans in Texas, and now they have gone into abortion in a big way. And a lot of people who aren't watching politics are looking up. There's an argument that will accrue to the benefit of the Democrats. I'm not sure how that plays out, but it'll be different than it would have been without this issue.
Bud, state Democrats have talked a whole lot about this. Can they really do anything more about it than just talk, though?
Well, of course, it won't help in Texas, but this is Kamala Harris' number one issue. If you believe that she will be either at the top of or second on the ticket in the next presidential election, this is her strength. They're playing to her strong point.
Bernadine, I want to ask, what is this law going to mean in practice, and what do you think the political implications are going to be of this as it all plays out?
Well, I think that it's going to motivate those women, motivate us who don't necessarily see this as an abortion issue, but as a pro-choice issue. It takes away our right as women to choose what's best for us. And I think that's where you're going to get the motivation and get the eyes looking where they would not have looked in the past. It's more of a pro-choice than an abortion issue.
Ross, I want to bring our attention now to another law that was signed by Governor Abbott, and this one also headed for the courts. This is, of course, the new voting restrictions in Texas. A lot has been said about this. What do you think is going to come of it?
Well, I think we're going to go to court on this, and I also think this is foreshadowing for the partisan fight over redistricting, which also involves voting rights law. We're going to spend a lot of time after the next special session covering court cases involving voting rights, redistricting, and all the rest.
Certainly not over yet. In fact, we might be just at the beginning of this one. Depending on who you work for right now, you may be required to get a vaccine soon because, Bud, the Biden administration coming out with some bold steps this week regarding vaccinations and requirements for vaccinations, basically pulling out the sticks instead of the carrots now.
And this is more news that plays to voters. You look at the swing states. Having a vaccine mandate was very popular. The vaccine states and the vaccine voters in the country outnumber the anti-vax voters, and so the Democrats are gaining ground.
Yeah, and
Yes.
Bernadine, we can't ignore the polls on that one either. Some recent polling for President Biden not looking so great on the coronavirus front. And of course, that was a big part of what he ran on. So there are politics in this, but again, there's also that public health part of it to try to get those 80 million people in America who have refused to get the vaccine so far to get it.
Yes, and more people are moving toward wanting a mandate in forcing people to take the vaccine because more people are getting sick and more people are dying. And it's going to be a winning issue for Democrats.
Ross, in our final seconds, what do you make of this? There's been a lot of outcry from the other side of the aisle that, we should be forcing people to do this.
Dueling mandates, the federal government wants the state's businesses and other businesses to vaccinate their employees. The state's punishing businesses that require their customers to be vaccinated. So we've got to fight over whose mandates get to win.
All right. Thank you all.
Always a
And
fight.
thank you for watching once again. Have a great week. We will be right back here to do it all again next Sunday.